Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you've been enjoying yourself thus far. Been learning some great things. The workshops have been great. Keynotes have been great. And it's time to move on and transition into the midday General Assembly, which entails an exciting fireside chat, which is going to be great. But before we go there, I want to share with you the second part of the declaration that we started with today. So just sit back, take this in if you can, and let's be mindful of why we're here, what we're doing. So while it's true, ideas fuel innovation, it is realized only by action. Only by taking meaningful action around an idea can it become a reality. Seeds are worth nothing if they are not planted, fed, and watered. One way I like to say it is this: the death of a seed is the killing of a potential forest. And even the most powerful and life-changing ideas are worth nothing if not implemented and given the necessary resources to grow. So today, as we move into this second half of this year's summit, we want to take a few moments to pause and give you an opportunity to think of three seeds that you can and will plant, feed, and water over the next year. Let me give you an example of what we mean by this. So an example of the seed and that I'm going to plant, feed, and water is I will plant the seed of community and fellowship by inviting people to coffee who are different than me with different ideas, so I may come to know them better with the hope of cultivating relationship that will prove to be built on the values of caring and serving others. So that's a seed. That's an example. These seeds we are committing to plant will be the ones for community, unity, and openness. That's our call to action. So on this day, I'm wondering, this day, same day, next year, what will your trees look like? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down 3 seeds. We want you to put them down, the ones you'll feed, water, so that this day, next year, what this tree will look like. What is it? What are the seeds? What will your tree look like? And if you would share with the other attendees or in the chat, name 3 seeds and name what that tree will look like. I want to encourage you, each one of you, in this work, because we can do better when we do it together. So, as you know, events of this magnitude, they take support from community at large. There are a number of sponsors who make this event possible with their generous contributions. So if you would do me a favor, please direct your attention to this sponsor video reel and be sure to thank them for all of their support. It's now time to introduce the third diversity award of the day. For those that may not have been with us for the opening session, allow me to share the history of the Upstate Diversity Leadership Awards. The 2021 Upstate Diversity Leadership Awards are presented in partnership between the Greenville Chamber and the Riley Institute at Furman University. Through its programs like the Diversity Leadership Initiative or Leaders Initiative, the Riley Institute advances social and economic progress in South Carolina and beyond, viewing the state's diversity as a strength and a critical piece of what will make us competitive in a global economy. The Upstate Diversity Leadership Awards were launched in 2004, born out of a community action project organized by one of the Riley Institute's diversity leaders initiative groups, Inclusion Fusion. This is the first and largest celebration of its kind in the region to recognize individuals and organizations for their accomplishments in uplifting diversity in the Upstate. And for the first time ever, the Upstate Diversity Leadership Awards is held in conjunction with the DEI Summit. In this new format, it remains an ongoing source of inspiration, demonstrating what's possible when we work together to make our community an inclusive place to work and live. This next award goes to the Outstanding Business. So please direct your attention to this video presentation.
Our mission at Jordan Construction Company is to build projects, people, and communities. One of the ways that we live out diversity and inclusion is in our hiring practices. We really focus on really wanting to have a diverse pool of thought, age, gender. We do quite a bit of training around diversity, and I know that word can mean a lot of different things to different people. So we just talk about how we need to live that out in our walk, how we need to live that out in our company values. So at the Greenville Tech Foundation, one of the things that we do is just ensure that the underserved communities and students that have financial challenges have the funds that they need to be able to pursue their education. Another program I'm really involved in is the Greenville Chamber. They have been such an important part of my journey, of my team's journey, ever since that first meeting. We are graduates of the Minority Business Accelerator program and participated in that program as a business and then as a coach for several years. Another one of the causes that I work with is Homes of Hope. Homes of Hope is very involved in teaching and training life skills to people that have had challenges in their past. We're also involved in providing affordable housing. That's just so important. It's such a tremendous need in our community. In Greenville, you hear different numbers. The point is, though, that we are very, very short for the amount of affordable housing in our community. I think that having quality, affordable housing is something that's it's a right for people, and we definitely want to be able to support that. I'm very excited that in 2022, we have scheduled about 200 units of affordable housing that will be coming out of the ground. It's so important for so many reasons, but in order for our community to continue to be diverse, to be able to continue to give opportunities for others, people need an opportunity to be able to live, again, in quality housing that they can afford.
Congratulations again to the Outstanding Business Diversity Award, Jordan Construction Company and founder James Jordan. An amazing man, amazing company. Congrats. And let's move on here. Planning this event, this is a big deal. It's all a year-long process. And our hope is not only for our audience to grow each year, but we love repeat attendees who protect the date and time, which signifies this conference's value. So take a moment to enjoy this teaser video to announce, you ready? The 2022, that's right, 2022 DEI Summit. Check this out. There you have it. So save the date, October 20th, 2022 for another virtual DEI Summit. I hope to see you there. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Greenville Chamber's President and CEO, Carlos Phillips, To provide greetings and introduce our fireside chat speakers. So following Carlos Phillips, you will see a short video to intro our presenters, and the next voices you will hear will be those of our special guests sharing on the topic of a better man movement, men as allies.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed the program so far. Like the theme of this year's event highlights, we hope you leave with takeaways you can put into action. I know I personally have already taken note of some best practices that we can implement here at the Chamber. I'm proud to introduce our featured speakers for our fireside chat on a better man movement, men as allies. But before I do that, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank Dr. Nika White for an outstanding job in building a phenomenal program for us today for the 5th year in a row. Nika, thank you not only for building a great program for the past 5 years, but also for already planning next year's event. Year after year, we have the opportunity to hear from world-class diversity, equity, and inclusion experts. And our next featured speakers are no different. We'll hear from Ray Arata, Robert Haddow Beaven, and Jason Gant. Ray and Robert are the founders of Better Man Movement, an initiative that provides resources, support, and community to encourage the involvement of men in creating an inclusive culture. In addition to being a co-founder of the Better Man Movement, Robert is also the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Revenue Officer of Jennifer Brown Consulting, and is a Carroll Certified Diversity Professional Advanced Practitioner. He holds his Bachelor of Science in Authentic Leadership and Organizational Development and is also earning his MBA. Fellow Better Man Movement co-founder Ray Arata has more than 10,000 hours in leading men to develop emotional literacy. He has delivered engaging talks to audiences featuring corporate leadership from organizations such as Visa, Microsoft, eBay, Intel, and Hewlett-Packard, just to name a few. Jason Gant is the global athletic and behavioral health consultant with Kaiser Permanente, one of America's leading healthcare providers and not-for-profit health plans. Jason is a certified mindfulness EQ coach trained through Search Inside Yourself, the global mindfulness platform developed at Google, and in his role at Kaiser Permanente, he's helped support healthy and inclusive communities, youth, workplaces, and teams globally. This fireside chat will be moderated by Dr. Nika White. Please join me in welcoming these impressive featured speakers. Dr. White.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Really appreciate the opportunity to greet this audience and to have you to become acquainted with 3 amazing panelists that I know are going to provide some really important insights that all of us can take away and begin to apply. I am delighted to serve as the moderator of this session, which again is all about a better man movement. And we're going to be digging into the topic of men as allies. As you've heard from Carlos Phillips, the Better Man Movement provides resources, support, and community to encourage the involvement of men in creating an inclusive culture. Through the Better Man workshops, training, events, their programming shifts organizations from managing diversity as a necessity to leveraging differences for allyship, connection, and collaboration. I want to frame our conversations today because I think this topic is so important. Men are often not comfortable or confident and how to contribute to the inclusive efforts. And we heard from our opening keynote, Gretchen Bellamy, when she shared that absolutely there is a place for all men in this type of conversation and in this work. So we're going to continue along those lines in today's Fireside Chat. The Better Men Conference events are a prime starting place for men to explore the roles they might play as allies for inclusion without shame or blame. So what we're going to do in this Fireside Chat is, again, I have Robert, Ray, and Jason joined with me, and we're going to amplify the need for men to serve as allies. So I want to take an opportunity to allow each of our guest panelists to introduce themselves in their own way. You've heard some of their credentials through Carlos, but I want them to talk about their intersecting identities, to give us a little bit of additional insight as to how in which they show up to this work of inclusion, belonging, and equity, and the lens in which they bring to this conversation. So let's start first with you, Robert, and then we'll go to Ray, and then Jason, I'll have you take up at the end of that. Robert?
Right, thank you, Dr. White. So I think it's one of the things that I practice almost every day, and it's become odd, is being comfortable being uncomfortable, and really focusing on that. And then I think the second piece that I've really tried to develop is, I think that when we talk about men and being within the D&I space or trying to be inclusive, the shame that's involved when we make mistakes. So it's really important. What I've really focused on doing for myself is surrounding myself by not only mentors, but people that feel comfortable enough to talk to me about my intent versus my impact. Because we all try to do the right thing. We all try to say something or do something. And recently I was responding to something on LinkedIn, and I asked a colleague of mine to respond to it, and they didn't give me the answer. They said, well, you're making this about your feelings, and then there's no call to action. And I was appreciative for two things. One is that they didn't give me the answers. They made me search for it myself. And I think the second thing that really kind of resonated for me was the fact that while my intention was there, and they said, listen, this is great, I understand what you're doing as an ally, but you're still not matching to the impact. So even after being in this world for 7 years, having whatever credentials we want to have, there's always a learning curve. And I think for me, it's really about, how do I make sure I continue to show up, not feel that shame, but allow the ability to make mistakes and have others be heard about what my impact aligns with them.
No, I appreciate that, Robert. And Ray, let's go to you. Share your DEI story, your intersecting identities, and the lens in which you show up to this work.
First mistake as a human being. Thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. First thing I'll say is I'm a white, cisgendered, heterosexual man with a ton of privileges, including the tall guy privilege. No, you can't tell because I'm sitting down. I refer to myself, and I thank Robert, my partner, for this, as forever an ally in training, because this work is never done. And as soon as I think that I've got it, I make a mistake. So that's the first thing I want to offer. And my DEI story has two parts to it. One is wake up call in life with a divorce and a business partnership breakup that had me do a men's weekend, that had me search long and hard and deep about what it means to be a better man, which to me now means a conscious partnership with the head and the heart. And so fast forward to 2011, when I met a diversity and inclusion consultant who invited me to attend a women's leadership event and said, you have something. The men need to hear from you. You sound like them and you look like them. So go to this event and just listen. Don't talk. So I did that. And all of the talk I heard from my mom about being second born in an Italian family where all the rights and privileges went to her brother. And then I thought about my wife in an Italian family. Then I thought about my daughter, who was going to be graduating with a degree in computer science. And it was man in the mirror moment number 2 that had me realize somebody needs to do something. So after a series of talks to largely women audiences about how to partner with men, I realized that a space needed to be created to put attention and attention on men where it was safe. So I basically just took all this men's work, the 55 weekends and 15,000 hours, and said, I know how to do this. I reached out for some help from some other corporate guys and said, I've got this idea about healthy masculinity. It needs to be brought into the leadership conversation, and on I went. And here we are. So that's my diversity story, and there's a lot of work to do, and we need more men to join the movement. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. And Jason, certainly want to bring you into the conversation. So tell us some things that we don't know about you by reading your bio and the lens in which you show up to this work.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you so much for this stage and platform to share. My name is Jason Gant, and I'm a behavioral health educator at Kaiser. And my DEI story really starts with the perspective of prevention. Having a public health academic background, really about prevention and looking after keeping society healthy. I studied a behavioral health master's in which I focused on the intersection of masculinity, health, and sports, and really interested in that due to my own interest in sports, but also when Ray Rice hit his then fiance in the elevator. And that's where that health and sports came in, but also that masculinity piece. And as an athlete, he understands how to be a teammate. He understands how to be in relationship, healthy relationship. And to think that he would hit his intimate partner in such a violent way made me think, like, where's the disconnect? Because he clearly understands relationship. He does it with men. We understand there's toxic masculinity in locker room culture. So he's able to be in that, but not with someone he would like to have kids with, lay with, actually develop a life with. And so that was the healthy piece. How do we show up as healthy men? Within sports, within our lives as men. And so that's the context that I come from, is integrating these, what we would mostly call soft skills, into these hard men that are athletes. Yet it's very juxtaposed, because just last week, I saw a coach in the NFL, I believe, crying. And so it's interesting to see that we have spaces where it's okay to be human, but not okay in other instances, because that wouldn't be considered cool or healthy masculinity. And so I do this work to share the ways in which we can be healthy, which, to Ray's point, is just being human. And to proactively, intentionally understand that we are human beings, not human doings. And that is what athletes are great at, great at doing. But they're not so good at being. And so that's why I do this work, is to help that shift from autopilot to aware. So thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you all sharing with us a deepened understanding of how in which you show up to this work. Just a reminder that our graphic recorder, Jacqueline Gilstrap, is capturing some of what's coming up in today's conversation. So I want to acknowledge the fact that this topic of male healthy masculinity, inclusive leadership, male privilege, particularly white male privilege, and its relationship to bias and workplace inclusivity and equity is uncomfortable for some people, right? It's a conversation that sometimes we have to warm up to. So one of the things that I know is part of your superpowers, Jason, is that you do a lot of work around mindfulness. And so before we all really deeply engage, and even our audience were to center their minds on being willing to allow themselves to be vulnerable as they take in the message of each of you that are sharing today, I want you just to take a moment to give us maybe a tip or two around mindfulness and how in which people should be showing up to this conversation.
Sure, love the question and the invitation. I define mindfulness as having two components: awareness and attitude. Awareness of your mind and your body with an attitude of curiosity and kindness. So your mind and body in space, and curiosity and kindness of whatever you're experiencing. And that is to yourself. And so that's how I define mindfulness: awareness of mind and body, attitude of curiosity and kindness. And so I would invite folks just to be right now, as I talked about, human beings. And we can do that by taking a page out of The Wizard of Oz, feeling your feet on the floor, tapping your right foot, tapping your left foot. I like to say your right foot is here and your left foot is now. When you're in the here and now, you're in the present moment. And we all know that presence is the greatest present. So take advantage of this moment, this dedicated space and time, to really engage and commit by feeling your feet on the floor, that support beneath you. And even to gain a little bit more trust, just tapping like Dorothy would, tapping your heels, making sure that floor is not going to fall beneath you, because you are supported and you are grounded. And we can end just by acknowledging your breath. And we just leaned into our feet and asking on our breath right now, because the breath in the body is always with us. We can't take them back into the past. We can't walk them into the future. Our breath is here, our body is here. And so that is the access that we're looking to engage. Awesome. And so leading this conference, I'll end by just saying, be curious, interested and in wonder. Refuse judgment, leave assumptions alone, and just be here, be now. And when you feel your shoulders begin to come up, just take a breath and slowly let them ease back down.
I love that. Thank you so much, Jason. That was a bit impromptu, but that was perfect. I think that it settled all of us to be able to show up to this conversation, being able to receive from it all that I know you all are going to give to it. So Robert and Ray, the two of you are responsible for the Better Man movement, the Better Man Conference. I know that you touched on it a little bit when you were providing your DEI story and the lens in which you bring to this conversation, but I want to dig a little bit deeper for the benefit of this audience. What inspired this movement and conference, and how is it different from other movements related to DEI? Which of the two of you would like to start?
Why don't you go, Robert, since I spoke a little bit, and then I'll fill in. I mentioned some things earlier.
Sure. I think that, for me, when I first met Ray and he had founded this organization, was that there was a lot of work to do. And attending his first conference, Jennifer and I went out there, and Jennifer was a keynote, and meeting with different people. And I think one of the conferences that I think really resonated when we had Tony Porter on stage. And he was talking about specifically sexual harassment, but it really resonated with me about men overall in the corporate space, right? There's this many men that are creating these atrocities, whether it's any of the isms, right? And he spread his arms way out and said, this is all the men that are out there. And it's all of these men that allow these men to get away with it. And it's really about, we talk about uncomfortable conversations where, I hear this from executives all the time, anywhere from a small startup to Fortune 100. I'm afraid I must say the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And my argument is that you're actually, by not saying anything, it's actually worse than saying the wrong thing, and being able to, as a leader, own the intent versus impact or the mistake and adjust in a forward fashion. So really what Better Man is trying to bring to the fold, not just men, but also women, of how to support men to do this. Right. So that's really, for me, it was, 80% of corporate America looks like me, the leaders in corporate America. If we want to change, there'd be change. So I think Better Man and what Ray's kind of created gives the ability to have those uncomfortable conversations in safe spaces where they can talk about the isms or the lack of understanding. And so we can help not shame them, but meet with them where they are and kind of help move them along towards being more aware of their intent and their impact.
what I would add is I've often been asked, why did you come up with Better Man? And the answer for that is that I assume positive intent that inside most, if not all men, we want to be better. So simply was an aspirational play. And after bringing my healing work into maximum security prisons and doing men's weekends with the Mankind Project, I kept hearing the same things articulated by men. And I realized that this idea of healthy masculinity and supporting men to basically co-rewrite with me what it means to be a man in a healthy way in our roles as husbands, fathers, leaders, friends, partners, that was absolutely necessary. So after, beating the drum for a number of years, factor in Time's Up, Me Too, COVID, Black Lives Matter movement, perfect storm. So, I'd like to say that men and organizations were backed into a corner with one move left: engage your men. So I think it's a great time for us to be putting the attention and intention on men, and like Robert said, without any shame or blame, and meeting them where they are. And there's some other stuff we can talk about later, but that's what I'd like to add for now.
No, that's great. And there's such a big focus on intersectionality with this Better Man movement and even with the conference. And so, Jason, I know just recently in September of this year, I believe you also became intimately involved in the Better Man conference and you presented a session. So what inspired you to say yes to the invite when Ray and Robert reached out?
Yeah, the invitation was an easy yes. As I shared, kind of my DEI perspective, the root and why I got into this work was that Ray Rice story. And, it's funny that we'd be talking about this, and as I'm sipping tea over here, it actually says, "I love Dubai" on the cup.
Yeah.
And it connects to this question because I was actually on my way back from Dubai, and on a layover from New York, received an opportunity to apply to a fellowship called Futures Without Violence, and they're headquartered in San Francisco, and ended up applying right there on the spot on vacation. Get back to San Francisco and find out I got into the program, and ended up being an ally and a fellow for Futures Without Violence for the next 2 years, mostly both in the States and while studying globally. And in that, really got a deeper, more intimate perspective of what it means to be an ally. One of two males in the program that were fellows, person of color, but then being in a group where we are actively, intentionally trying to reduce the harm that children and families are experiencing. And those conversations and those fellowship conversations led to me participating in domestic violence trainings, completing domestic violence trainings in San Francisco, and really just getting more and deeper into understanding how we as men can show up for ourselves, but show up for our partners and just in life in general. And those conversations, those trainings, the fellowship, Futures Without Violence, all of that just taught me that we all need support. If we just take a macro perspective of the situation, it comes from not having support in the situation. And as we've all alluded to, we have privilege, we have power. That's why we're in these seats right now. And so with that privilege and power, wanting to reshape what it looks like to be a man and what masculinity actually means, because it can be so harmful, and we see so many examples of that. And so joining, adding to the Better Man Conference, accepting that invitation was just an automatic, and felt like, oh man, there's folks like me. I can't believe that it's taken this long for us to find each other, but we have, and it is a pleasure to be in conversation and to have participated.
No, that's great, Jason. Thank you. And so, Ray, this next question is for you. You and I have talked on a couple occasions in preparation for today's event, and it was surfaced in our talks that there are a lot of men, specifically white men, that feel that the increased DEI conversation and focus that has been amplified over the past 12 to 18 months is a distraction. Why do you believe that is the case? And what would you say to those men?
So thank you for the question. But before I answer, I want to throw one thing in about your prior intersectionality question. Robert and I, as white, cisgendered, able-bodied men, recognize the importance of decentering ourselves and centering the voices of others. And so one of the things we committed to a long time ago with the Better Man Conference is to do just that. So I think it's worth mentioning and modeling, because guys like us who've got the power, the position, and the privileges, if we do that, things will shift a lot quicker. Now, to your question, I thought a lot about this, and it's almost kind of a trick question, because my answer, why do I believe that's the case? I don't believe it's the case. And what I would say to these men is that it's not a distraction. That's part A. Part B is that this is your unexamined privilege in action. Now, this whole thing about privilege, we can demonize it or we can humanize it. So I would seek to educate them about privilege and invite them to step into what I call heart-based leadership, which are principles like emotional literacy. That's right word, that's Jason's arena around mindfulness. Vulnerability, authenticity, accountability, inclusivity, and love. And, people say, well, Ray, what is this heart-based leadership? What is it? Well, it's when leaders, and it doesn't need to be just men, fully utilize their skills and their humanity to guide their communication, their choices, and their relationship with others. I could go on, but just in terms of this distraction thing, I move that aside and say, come on, let's get real and let's talk about what's really going on, not just for you, but for everybody else.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ray. So, Robert, I want to move to you, and I want to stay in this vein a bit. You are a very successful white male in the marketplace. When were you first awakened to the need for men to acknowledge their privilege? And what was that moment like for you? And how has it shaped your leadership?
So when I first learned about my white privilege, when I started working with Jennifer and working with her, and in this space, I kind of stayed in the background because, like Ray, I'm 6'2", I'm a tall white male with tons of privilege. And Jennifer introduced me to Bo Young Lee. And she kind of looked at me and said, you have all this privilege, you need to use it. So then, of course, what happens, it goes to my head and my ego blows up. And then working with one of my colleagues, Jeffrey Smith, we're working with a client that had at one of their retail shops, some black men arrested for being in there. And he said, Rob, what would you do if you were in that situation? So I kind of went through some different scenarios, and he said, well, what else? And I said, what else could I do, Jeffrey? And he goes, get arrested. It was then and there I realized, that was the day I changed it to ally in training, that I'll never be aware of the privileges that I have and how impactful they can be in so many different areas. While we try to define privileges, I learn every day, whether it's walking down the street or looking, getting something in a store or interacting with a stranger, that I have all these different privileges that show up and I'm not even aware of it, even when it's happening. So, as far as shaping my leadership, it's being vulnerable, it's being transparent, it's really focusing on creating a safe space for my colleagues and team members to be able to feel comfortable to come to me and say, can you help me understand this a little bit better? Or again, going back to that intent versus impact, and it's a big lift. It's not something that, again, it's being comfortable being uncomfortable.
No, it's great. So Jason, to bring you back into the conversation, to center your voice, the present distributed workforce situation due to the pandemic has, for many organizations, diminished the frequency of what I would refer to as high quality workplace connections. So knowing the importance of empathy and compassion during this time, how can men leaders lean in more in support of colleagues of color or any other groups that may be impacted by systems of oppression?
Yeah, I think there's 3 steps to leaders leaning in. First step, what I would say, is respect. I teach youth and teens at Kaiser, and first rule in our groups is respect. And I think just leaning in on that. There's a saying that we use, don't yuck my yum. And so don't yuck your manager's yum, the ones that you're leading. If they have something to say, if they have something to share and experience, don't yuck their yum. Rather receive it with respect. And how do we respect? It's really through listening for understanding. Not listening, wanting to share what's coming up for us and interrupting, but actually listening for understanding. Like, I'm trying to be here for you and listen. So like putting on that curiosity cap. And that would be the third step, is just leaning into that curiosity, putting on the curiosity cap, not assuming, not judging. And through respect and through listening for understanding, and we listen for understanding through being curious, which just means to be interested and in wonder of what's happening. And I think that provides a container for some space to allow other voices to be heard. And so doubling down on that listening for understanding once there's some space to be heard. And so respect, listening for understanding, leaning in on curiosity are ways that leaders can lean in and support this workforce during what I call a VUCA time.
Yeah.
VUCA is a military term that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah.
It's like when we can't feel our feet on the floor.
Thank you. I want to stay right here with you, Jason, and I want to go back to healthy masculinity and the significance of men being more intentional to connect to their emotions. What value does that create, Jason? And what recommendations would you offer up to men seeking to practice healthy masculinity in the workplace?
Well, as I shared, I really focused, and my why was on athletes. And my wake-up story for working with athletes and seeing them in this capacity was coaching a team that made it to the Final Four of state colleges. And in the Final Four, we are tied at halftime, meaning it's 0-0. With 2 minutes to go, we're down 1. And at the end of the game, we lost by 11. So to me, it was a very clear picture and illustration that I saw with my own eyes as a coach, that physically we could play with this team. We were in the entire game. It was 0-0 at halftime. We're down 1 with 2 minutes to go. And playing for the championship round, this is only 4 teams left in the state. The last 2 minutes became critical. The intensity was increased. And you would think that as a coach, this was the most exciting time, but it was a really anxious time. You would think that your team would want to play in the intensity. You think that they would rise to the occasion because this is what we practice for. Not for that particular moment, but to play the game. And the clock hasn't finished. So we're still playing. The intensity is rising. And what I saw is our team give up 10 points. So we lose by 11, having been down 1 in a span of 2 minutes. So we crumbled mentally. And so that mind-body connection that I think of, we thought we were so strong physically. Oh, I'll take it myself. I can do it. I'm the better player. And so that team of 5 we had, we began just to take ourselves out. And that's what we thought was the healthy masculinity that was going to help us get to the championship. But really, it took us out of the championship. And so that was my wake-up call to understanding the minds, understanding how powerful mental health is. And I would think that athletes would love that intensity. Athletes would call that competition. That's why they compete. That's why they play the game. It's to be in competition. But yet, in that moment of intensity, they folded. And so that is why I do this work, is to connect that human being side, that we're showing up, playing with 5. We put our hands in the huddle and we say family. So what does that actually mean? And what does that actually mean in the intensity, in the fire, when we actually need support, when we actually need that teammate? Are we leaning in? Are we using that? And so healthy masculinity is absorbing all of those emotions, understanding the good, the bad, and being with it, rather rolling out the welcome mat and befriending it. And that's really what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is changing your relationship to feedback. Changing your relationship to feedback. We're already going to have negative thoughts. The pandemic lets us know we're already we cannot control. So we may have a day where there's some hurdles, some adversity. And in those moments of intensity, in those moments of uncertainty, living in this VUCA world, how do we manage ourselves? And so with emotions, with mindfulness, through grounding, being in the present, but receiving that present moment with kindness and compassion allows us to put our best foot forward. And so working with men and athletes, call myself cheating a little bit, because athletes understand the body. They're already moving. So now it's connecting their minds. The harder work is what Ray and Robert are doing, bringing this to corporate groups, folks that are in their seats for 8 hours a day. Now even harder, they're in their comfort and safe spaces at home. So maybe even less movement. So how do we engage the body while engaging the mind? And so athletes, they're already got that movement. The work is really, how do we engage the greater society who have said, you know what, I'm not an athlete. I don't need to move my body. I'm not moving. But conceptually, cognitively, I understand. But right now, this conference, which is why we're having this conference, is because we can't conceptually understand and make change. We have to act. Mm-hmm. And so that is why I do this work, is to provide a freeway, an opportunity to create the conditions for men to put their best foot forward. And athletes was a opportunity and a freeway to get going. But now I have expanded to supporting all men.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jason. The pictures that you are helping us to create in our heads is really bringing this message to life. And so I appreciate the analogies that you're bringing in. And so just a moment ago, Ray, you mentioned a lot about the need as a white cis male to center the voices of those that may find themselves a part of underrepresented, or I like to say underestimated populations. So Robert, I want to go to you for this question, and it relates to that. Centering others is also something that I've heard you speak on as well, to communicate how you like to show up to others as a white male ally. I believe in practicality. So if you could maybe share 1 or 2 examples of what that looks like in practice for you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, briefly, it was when you reached out to us and said, hey, we want to do a panel. And it's okay, you know, I'm a white guy, right? Like, who else is going to be on the panel? It can't be. And I've seen that time and time again, where I've walked into what it means to be an ally, and they start talking all about themselves and how wonderful they are and everything they've achieved. That's not what it is. It's using my privilege to open up spaces, because the reality is, you know, we see things on the news, we see, you know, headlines, whatever it is. They don't create aha moments. If I see something on the news, and I might be like, oh, that's horrible. But then if Jason says, Rob, this just happened to me last week, I'm going to be like, what? You know, because I know Jason. Maybe I work with him, maybe he's a friend or a colleague. Like, the reality is that aha moment's going to stick with me more than the news will. So by people like me continuously talking out and taking up space, it doesn't allow for those aha moments to be heard by, and I love what, you know, how you changed underrepresented. I actually choose underinvested, right? Because, which is basically women. 51% of our population are women. They're not underrepresented, they're underinvested. And I would offer the same thing for people of color, et cetera, right? So it's really about, it's not about as an ally, and that's why Ray and I use ally in training or advocate in training. It's not about us. It's about creating that space for others to share, so we can all share the aha moments. And if there's an opportunity where it's just people that look like me being able to share the aha moments with them, because that may hold more weight if they're just hearing it from a headline.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Ray, I want to go back to you. You mentioned in the beginning that part of your leadership really deals with the head and the heart. And I so resonated with that. So tell us more about that in terms of how you show up from a leader perspective.
Off the heels of my own wake-up call and doing my work as a man, my inner work, I came to realize this very important relationship between the head and the heart, hence the conscious head and the conscious heart. So what I never got training to do, and most men didn't, was how to go into the body. And as Jason was saying earlier, athletes already have an advantage. So I work with a lot of my clients to get them into the body, because that's where emotions reside. And there has been no playbook on how to feel my sadness or acknowledge it, my grief, my fear, my shame. And what's been permissible only in society has been anger. And so by introducing men to these 5 core feelings of sad, mad, glad, fear, and shame, and helping them understand that there's a choice you can make if you're present to them, instead of staying unconscious and resorting to the tactics we all learned when we were little kids. By being mindful that, oh, I'm feeling sadness right now, and I'm not going to allow my brain to write the old story that kept me safe. I'm going to slow down. And as an ally, I'm going to feel the fear of saying or doing the wrong thing, but I'm not going to stay on the sideline. I'm going to use the fear to put me on high alert, and I'm going to keep going. You know, and so that's why I believe connecting to our emotions and then having that conscious partnership of the head and the heart, not just for men, is so critically important. Which is why when I was introduced to Jason, I'm like, he's the perfect guy to take everybody at the conference through this mindfulness exercise. And we ended up finding out how much of a background we have together, both living in San Francisco, both playing basketball, both having not just our diversity story, but our basketball story. So that's for another conference. So there you go.
I love that, Ray. I want to stay right here with you for this next question as well. So what are some of the obstacles, and maybe give me the top 1 to 3 hurdles or obstacles that white men often experience that prevent them from being fully able to champion and to embrace the work of DEI?
So 2 of them come to mind. It's lack of awareness of other people's lived experiences, because if I, as a white guy, am walking on the path of being a white guy, I'm not having the lived experience of what it means to be a woman or a person of color, and I'm not feeling the pain. That's no excuse, but that's one. But the bigger one, the one that I'm writing about lately, is fragility. Now, Robin DiAngelo talks about, white fragility, but For me as a white guy, fragility is when I center my own feelings of discomfort around confronting my own sexism and racism, and I make them more important than the lived experiences of somebody else. Now, what does this fragility look like in action? Silence, inaction, despite my privileges, or me defending my intentions. So what happens is disconnection, hurt feelings, and maybe even shame on my part. And so, as Robert said earlier, there's a minority of men who keep us on the sidelines. It doesn't serve anybody. So what I've been thinking about is I've got this white male ability, my privileges, and there's this white male fragility. Which one do I want to operate from? So I'm really, and it's a little scary because, as an example of the fragility is what's going to happen to me as a white guy if I start talking about this? What are the white guys going to say or do? Well, I started thinking about that too. And like, you know what? They may exclude me. They may say stuff about me. I may be booted out of the club. So what? My life, here's my privilege. My life is not in danger. So I want to push through, and I want to encourage other men to push through. Be courageous, have some courage, come from your heart. Don't do it alone, and trust, because that's what it's going to take. I know I could go on, but I'm going to stop there. I've got a little bit of passion about this.
We love that passion, Ray. We do. So I have one final question, and then I'm going to turn it over to our amazing MC for today's conference, Tim Pecoraro, to maybe take a few questions from our audience. And I want each of you to maybe take 10 seconds or so to respond to this question. We've talked a lot in preparation for today about legacy. People often will ask, what type of legacy do you want to leave? And I remember, Ray, you said the better question, or the more appropriate question, I believe, is how do you want to be experienced by others? And I love that. So I want each of you to answer that question. How do you want to be experienced by others? And as each of you are sharing, I am going to present a call to action to our audience to also reflect on that question for yourselves as well. So we'll go in the order of Ray, Jason, and Robert, and then we'll bring Tim on to join us for some audience questions.
So I'm going to go right to the sixth principle of heart-based leadership, love. I want to be remembered as a lover of men, a lover of people, the embodiment of love, so that other people could emulate that. 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'll say legacy. First, my mind immediately goes to the breath, mindfulness, leaning in on the breath, rest in power, George Floyd, sharing the breath. And when I think about breath, I think about life. And to live is just to be. You don't have to be this or that. You are. And so I invite everyone to just say, I can, I am, watch me. And to leave, to follow in faith, living in the breath.
I think for me, it would be, and it's, Jason mentioned a few times, I had it embroidered in some of my jackets, and I have some signs up around my house. It's be curious, or basically be curious. I want to be remembered as being curious, being open. That's a legacy I want to leave behind, and that it's okay to Ray's point. My life's not in danger, right? I can be curious, and that's part of my privilege. And how Jason was talking about it, it's definitely something that is always forefront of my mind in doing this work.
Awesome. Thank you all kindly. So Tim, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you.
This is great. I'm sitting here and I'm taking all kinds of notes because I do a lot of work like this, and my gosh, this is great, guys. Thank you so much. I want to start with, because I love what the three of you said, especially around the legacy stuff. I'm a big, living forward person. So what do you want your legacy to be? Begin with the end in mind, back up to where you are. What priorities do you need to establish in order to make that legacy true? Now let's start from here and get to there, right? So what's it going to take? And I love the love. I love the breath, live, be, you are, follow in faith, living in the breath, be curious, be open. Here's the thing though, how do you get men to get deeper, right? Because there's a thing, I think men, there is that sensitivity, there is a softness, and I don't care who you are. Like a lot of people don't realize, and I've studied a lot of these incredible athletes like a Mike Tyson and what was broken with him, right? When he had Costamato in his life, he was one type of fighter. But once Costamato left and that father figure was gone, look what happened, right? But there's still that gentleness inside. There's all these things where they want to connect deeper. So what do you do to help men understanding this men as allies, to move them into this place where they're able to soften up and still know that there's a masculinity in there, this fragile, because it's like, it's either ability versus fragility, right? They're foes somehow. But how do you, if any one of you, all three of you, how do you lead men into that space for the deeper thing that opens them up for the thing that's going to have the greatest impact and better benefit for themselves and for those around them?
2 words: go first. That's what I do. I put that in chat. When I go first and I take the risk, I can't tell how many times another guy's come up to me and said, "Hey, can I talk to you?" He's looking over his shoulder to make sure to know.
Yeah.
Seeing him talk to me. But that's how it starts, one man at a time, hence a movement.
Right. Awesome.
And I'll just add 2 words to that: curiosity and moment. Be first, but be curious of that moment.
And to take off of that, right? So be first, be curious. By being curious, asking questions. There's something underlying. When someone says, I don't believe in white privilege. Okay, so what does white privilege mean to you? Right? What about white immunity? Right? So it's trying to move along to get what's underneath, because there's something there that we're not missing. We're just looking at the top surface.
That's so good. And the other part, because I'm a big story person, I believe in the story, and something that was said earlier, like the news isn't going to get anything right, but the story will, if I can get into connecting with it. And I tell people all the time, there's some people that are masters at headlines. And the thing is they never dig into the story. And we have a world of people running around spitting off headlines. That's it. They're one-liners, slogans, and headlines, but there's no depth, right? It's like a card house. It's going to house of cards. It's going to fall. It has no filling in the middle of it. So with that, how do you help men tell a better story? How do you help them with their story, bring it out so they're not just headlines? And that's any of you.
Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, no, I was going to say just leaning into that moment. And mindfulness is that moment to moment awareness. And so how do you get deeper is by stopping. Another definition really short for mindfulness is the shift from autopilot to aware. So getting off autopilot. This is how I normally operate. This is my normal routine. All right, well, let's stop. Let's take a breath. Let's observe what's happening right now. Now let's peacefully proceed. And that's taking advantage of that moment when ordinarily maybe we just let that moment pass by and we don't even notice it, that it's an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to be curious, an opportunity to be with ourselves or others in a kind way. It's really easy to catch that headline and then be judgmental or assume, but to show up in a kind way that's compassionate while connecting mind and body. So it means we're knowing. It doesn't mean it's the way that we want, but I'm knowing in my mind and body, and I'm taking this next step with compassion, acknowledging that there's a hurdle here. I might have to do a leap. I might have to go around. I might have to bomb right through it. Whatever it is, I'm now choosing that. And so there's a quote by a psychologist named Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. And our power to choose our freedom. And that freedom is really to live. Now, that quote is coming from a 4-time Holocaust survivor. So talk about being and taking advantage of the moment and changing your perspective or lens of how you see your next step. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the power to choose our freedom.
I want to build on what Jason's saying with the one word that really spoke to me, and that's space. So to your question, Tim, it's about creating a psychologically safe space for that man or allied, the person who desires to be an ally, to tell their story. And we could take tips from all three of us, you know, go first, breath, be curious, ask questions. It's all that, but it's before that, contextually, it's what can I do to create the space for that other human being to tell their story. So I love that quote, Jason. We use that in our trainings. We've used that slide many times, but you gave me something to think about today. Thank you.
So that's great. I mean, there's a tremendous emphasis. I mean, we need it everywhere because it's funny, like emotional and psychological safety is so important. And I mean, it's a core human need for all of us, right? It may look different for each of us, but it's so important for us to have that. So really quick, if each of you, because I have like a minute here, just really quick, what is the next thing that you want to do to make a dent or an impact, some new thing? Because I believe it, you know, you align your intention with your impact. So whatever you want your impact to be, you got to align your intention with it, right? What would you like to see in the next 12 months, something you want to work aggressively toward for men as allies? What would you like to do? Each one of you go.
Developing, supporting, and seeing men, which allows them, as Ray has shared, as Robert has said, to speak up, to actually stand in their shoes. Working with athletes, working with basketball players, moving, wanting to be all stylish with crossovers and dunks and whatnot. As we're talking about, going deeper. Can you actually stand in those shoes with your head up, confident in how you are behaving, confident in how you are showing up as a leader? And not as a leader in some grandiose way, but as a leader, as a person, as a teammate in this community. So just by being in this community, you're a leader. Because you're being seen, and I see you. And I want to see you. And I want to hear you. The good, bad, and the ugly, because you are human. And we all have just gone through a pandemic. So none of us have 1000% great days. So I see you, I hear you, I love you. And I want you to be able to stand in that because you are loved.
Thank you.
So,
Ray?
Yeah, so my new book, Showing Up, How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace, I wrote to get the playbook in the hands of men that want to be better allies. And so there's two answers to your question. I'd love, not from a promotion perspective, but for the sake of the movement, to get as many men to have that book as possible. So that's one thing, and that's kind of already in motion. But the bigger piece, the heavier lift, is to go to an even bigger platform, media. And so I've been toying with writing a treatment for a positive masculinity docu-series to reach even more men. and to highlight all those people, those men that have gone first, so that instead of looking at the masculinity crisis, instead of looking at toxic masculinity, we can look at these models so that anybody who watches that can see what's possible. Now that for me is scary and exciting. But so that's hopefully a year from now, I will have written the treatment. So.
All right. Great. Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's it's continuing to develop and learn from others and build tools, because it's, one of the things having a lot of this privilege is it's very easy for me to go on the attack, because A, I'm allowed to because I have privilege. B, there's really going to be minimal repercussions. The reality is, how do I meet people where they are and try to have those conversations? Because what's happening, whether you're talking about critical race theory, you're talking about defunding the police, you're talking about white privilege, these terms have been weaponized. To your point earlier, Tim, the headlines, right? They've been used to weaponize when no one understands. Defunding the police isn't removing the police altogether, right? There's actually, I live just on the border of New Jersey. There's 2 towns that have defunded the police, right? That have moved the measures. The city of Newark, which is not necessarily a safe area, they fired 0 bullets from a police officer's weapon in 2020. There are ways to do this, yet we weaponize those words. So for me, it's, if I look back on the last 12 months and I can say, you know what, I've had more conversations in the last 12 months than I ever have, where I've been able to meet people where they are and help them. I'm not asking them to change. I'm asking them, to Jason's point, be curious. How do we start being curious? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe something I don't have all the facts and move through. So that's really what success for me in the next 12 months would look like. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for these great answers. Thank you, Nika. Thank you, Jason, Ray, Robert, for the insightful dialogue. This has been great. And thank you, Jacqueline Gilstrap, our visual recorder. Can't wait to see the final reveal. So we're going to move on quickly here. It's time to announce another Diversity Award winner. And this time we are recognizing a deserving person with the Calder D. Ehrman Outstanding Individual Award. So please direct your attention to this video.
We're a one-to-one mentoring organization that recruit volunteers to mentor kids one-to-one, and a lot of our kids come from single-parent homes and they need a positive role model, someone that's going to be dedicated and committed to them to show them different opportunities. I believe in representation. A lot of kids that we serve are children of color. And so when I first became in this position as CEO, I seen that our board needs to be more diverse. In order for us to be really engaged and connected, I wanted to bring people on that not only looked like the kids that we serve, but had a passion for the organization as well. So not only do we have a diverse board, but a lot of our board members are bigs as well. I began to take classes, leadership classes. I began to take classes on diversity, equity, inclusion, including other people that don't look like me, think like me, or have the same morals or values, but still those people need to be valued as well. So I had to check myself. And so if I had to check myself, I'm sure that other people probably feel the same ways. I serve on a couple of boards, and I know one particular board that I served on, they actually formed a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and I was chairperson over that committee. And that kind of like got the ball rolling with this particular organization to have these uncomfortable conversations and to bring to the attention that, we're not doing this right. A lot of people have concerns. We as leaders, we don't know what's actually going on until we talk to some employees that actually work there. And so I was able to do that. A lot of times people are just afraid of the conversation. People may be afraid of their jobs or their livelihood to really express how they feel about a certain thing. And I'm glad I was able to be that voice to bring things to, the leadership attention.
Congratulations to Charlene Cheeks of Big Brothers and Big Sisters as the recipient of the Calder D. Ehrman Outstanding Individual Award. So I hope that you are ready for the afternoon workshop sessions because the time is almost here. And I wish to direct your attention to this short video to highlight the topics and presenters of the upcoming 4 concurrent sessions, of which you can select to attend one. But just a reminder that all the sessions are being recorded. Okay, we don't want anyone to miss anything. Where the ones that are recorded are the ones we have presenters' permissions to do so, and we will make them available within 5 to 7 business days post-event at the summit website. Always remember DEIsummit.com. And if more than one session interests you as a registrant, you'll have access to the replay. So that's good news. So at the conclusion of the video, we will go into our next break, where I look forward to engaging with as many of you as I can in the chat. Have a look at this video.